Part 22. Track sat down next to me. Shifting without me now, huh? There was a bit of hurt in his voice, but I knew he really didn't think I could warn him beforehand. I looked at him, and he tried to smile a moment too late. He sat a stack of clothes on my lap. I left my head on the back of the couch. Why is there a council meeting about me? He sat sideways, one of his legs bent on the couch, the other one hanging over. Are you kidding? You're hot, he teased. When I rolled my eyes, he sighed. Word is getting out, Ray. Rumors are wild, so the council thought it best to come here, meet with your dad, and get the truth. Great, I moaned, and he nodded. I agree. I don't like them being here either. Ryan and Phil are in there, though, so at least the pack and your dad will have your back. And Jonathan, I added. Track didn't respond to that. I rolled my head to the side to look at him. Why don't you like him? I asked, sitting up. I put the clothes on the other side of me and pulled a few pieces at a time under the large blanket. I grunted as I wiggled into my clothes underneath it. He shrugged. Never said I didn't. I gave him the you didn't have to say it, it's written all over your face look, and he shrugged. I like him well enough, he grumbled. But, I stated, pulling my shirt over my head. Nothing. Now are your legs still rubber? I looked down at them and wiggled them. A bit. Sometimes I'm fighting right away, other times it takes a while. He nodded, stood, and went over to the movies. Okay then, let's see which one we'll watch. The one with the hot blonde chick. We both turned as Rock and Jackson walked in. I smiled, and they both rushed me. Careful, Track hissed and was instantly at my side, his arms out protectively. They stopped and looked at me, then at him. She just shifted, he explained, his voice still gruffed. They nodded and plopped down on either side of me. Track gave them a warning growl, then went back to picking a movie. So, is that Lady Doc single? Rock asked, and I chuckled, sitting up and getting more comfortable between them. Sorry, she has her eyes on someone else, I smiled. Plus she's too old for you. Rock wiggled his eyebrows. I like the older ones. Jackson saw the movie Track had picked out and shook his head. Not that one. The one where the Wares and all the teenagers and have that big mansion just outside of town. I laughed. Ah, the one with all the hot chicks. He nodded and I shook my head. Musk season already? There really wasn't a season for it, but once a werewolf hit a certain age, they started to be a little one-track minded. Jackson, Rock, and Track had their work cut out for them. As I said, female werewolves weren't as numerous as the males, probably 10 to 1 if the odds were that good. I guess it really was no wonder that they often dated outside of their race, for that reason alone. Humans were always tougher, though, especially if the wolf really loved the human, with the aging difference. Humans rarely made it to 90 years old, where werewolves lived to 500 easily. I sat contemplating all of this as the movie started. Track shoved Rock out of the way and moved in next to me. Although Rock was bigger than him, Track outranked him, and Rock moved with only a little verbal ribbing. I listened to the catcalls and to Rock and Jackson argue about which female was the hottest. I laughed and argued with them, snuggled in my mini pack. They raided the small refrigerator, and after the movie was over, we headed to the kitchen, my legs sturdy now. I sat on a bar stool at the counter, and we all chatted while they ate. I didn't crave the food they were eating, but I was glad to have some normal conversation, no matter that it mostly revolved around food and females. When I leaned forward at one point, Rock saw my necklace as it fell out of my shirt. "Who gave you that?" he asked, his face a bit more serious. "My dad," I replied, shoving it back under my neckline. "Not silver, right?" he asked. "Of course not," I huffed. That lightened his mood back up, and he took a huge bite of his sandwich. I rolled my eyes as his cheeks filled with food. "Really? You expect to get a girl with those type of table manners?" I teased. After they filled their stomachs, we headed to the game room. Track took my hand and waved the guys off. I frowned and followed him off to the side. When the other two started to argue at one of the games, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. I gasped. "I thought I had lost that," I said, reaching out and touching the gold charm bracelet in his palm. He nodded. "So did I. When you shifted the first time, in the garage, well, I didn't think to look for it. When I did, I couldn't find it, so I thought it was gone. But then Mike found it, under one of the benches. The links were trashed, but—" I smiled at it and then up at him. He shrugged. "You can't wear it around your wrist. It'll just break off when you shift." I frowned then. He looked at the chain around my neck and I pulled it out. Then he bent the links holding the two charms on and moved closer to me. I watched him hook the wolf charm and the pack mark on my necklace. When he was done, he slid the rest of it back into his pocket and nodded. "That should do for now." I lifted it. "Thank you," I whispered, smiling down at it. I beat Rock twice in the motorcycle game and Track once. Jackson was shooting hoops at the mini basketball game. We were laughing and enjoying ourselves when the guys went quiet and turned. I followed their heads to the door and saw Jonathan, Ryan, and Phil walk in. I climbed off the motorcycle and stood, with a smile of victory slipping off my face. They walked over to us, Jackson joining from the other side. Ryan and Phil made small talk, and then Ryan said his goodbyes and left. Phil took a bit longer, not saying anything about the meeting, but shooting Track some silent looks. Finally, he hugged me tightly. "I'm taking off now, too. You take it easy and stay inside." He gave me a hard look, and I quickly nodded. When he was gone, Jonathan looked at me. "So who won?" "I did, of course," I stated, trying to smile. Were we really all going to avoid the topic forever? Jonathan looked a bit too serious, and his earlier mention of that talk lumped in my throat. "Do you mind if I talk to Track for a few minutes?" he said, and my eyes widened. As glad as I was that it wasn't me, I was shocked. I only nodded, and Jonathan turned to Track, who looked just as surprised. "Would you mind taking a walk with me?" he asked my best friend. Track stepped up and gave a short nod. Jonathan turned back to me, smiling. "We won't be long." Jackson, Rock, and I watched them leave. "They aren't going to go square off, are they?" Jackson asked, and I turned and looked up at him. He smiled down at me. "They wouldn't do that here." He threw in the last part with a snicker. "Boys, really." The guys tried to distract me with games, but I kept glancing at the door, and my mind was too occupied. What could they have to talk about? "You're not paying attention," Rock accused as he beat me for the second time on the cycles. I frowned at the score blinking in front of me. "Sorry." He shook his head full of blonde hair, smiling at me. "You really need to have a sit-down talk with a female." My brows wrinkled. Why does everyone keep saying that to me? Jackson walked over, chuckling. "Because it's true. I don't think us guys could do it justice." "Do what justice?" I had my hands on my hips now as I stared at them both. They looked at each other, and then Rock stepped up next to me and draped his arm over my shoulder. "Ray, musk isn't just something that happens to wares. It's just what we call it." I rolled my eyes. I know that, Rock. I groaned. They weren't really thinking I was so naive about Jonathan's feelings for me, were they? He shrugged with his arm around me. Well, you see, that vampire. Jonathan, I put in, and he nodded. Yeah, him. He likes you. I sighed. I know that. Jackson grinned. And it's rubbing Track's fur the wrong way. That was obvious too. What were they getting at? Track was my best friend, and he was also my pack. He was territorial for both reasons. I knew that the relationship he and I seemed to skate on the line in most people's eyes, but we knew what it was. I could never cross that line with him. It would threaten what we had, and I wasn't willing to ever lose that. He was too important to me. Rock pulled me closer. Ah, Reina, our little pup. I shoved him and ducked under his arm. You two are mental, I stated, shaking my head, but smiling. Rock turned, holding his arms out. What about me, Reina? I flinched. What about you? He puffed out his chest. I'm strong, smart. He growled when Jackson laughed at that comment. I would make a great... I put my hands up to cut him off. Not funny, guys. You two really need to get girls. Jackson laughed. We won't argue with you there. Then we all turned as Track and Jonathan finally walked back in. Jonathan was smiling, but looked a bit stressed. Track was nearly glaring. My eyes widened. The other two noticed as well, and Rock put his arm back over my shoulders. I was just telling Pup here why I would make a great mate. Ugh, he grunted, as my elbow found his rib. I moved out from under his arm and brushed my hair back into place. Jonathan ignored him and looked at me. So, do you have a few minutes now? I swallowed hard and looked at Track, who was looking at Rock. I looked at Rock, whose smile had slipped as well. What's going on? Jonathan held out his hand, and I took it, still looking at Track. He finally looked at me and seemed to try to regain himself. He put on a small smile, and I frowned. What's wrong? I asked again, the worry in my voice. Track shook his head, and I let Jonathan walk me out of the room. I was frowning when we stepped into the hallway, and Jonathan looked at me. Don't worry, Reina. Everything will be fine. He seemed to be trying to convince both of us, and I followed him slowly down the hallway. He walked us to a smaller sitting room, and Michael opened the door. Martin walked in ahead of us, and I frowned as I watched the two of them visually inspect the room. I did notice Martin inhaling deeply as he looked around. Finally, Michael nodded and they stepped outside, the door shutting behind them quietly. What was that about? I asked quietly. Jonathan, still holding my hand, shrugged. Security has been stepped up a little. I bit my lower lip, and we headed to a small couch. I sat down, and he joined me, turning to face me. I thought it was about time you and I had that talk. Blinking more times than needed, I nodded. He chuckled. You look as if you were brought here to be sentenced. I shook my head slightly. I'm just very confused, I admitted. Well, I hope to clear some of that up. I glanced at him and he nodded. Something inside of me seemed to flip-flop when I looked at him. I wonder how he did that. First of all, I want to tell you that your father and I have been meeting a lot, and we have put some things into place, so I don't want you to worry. I tilted my head and he continued. You have been told that there are rumors about you floating around, and that is one reason why we met with the council. When I nodded, he did as well. It seems there has also been a breach. A breach? Yes. A vial of your blood, when you shifted, has gotten out. I looked down at my arm and he put a hand on mine. The doctors have been quarantined, but we aren't sure it was one of them. They have assistants that help in the labs. One of them has gone missing. My brows furrowed and he pulled my hand into his. There are those out there that see this as a way to create a superior vampire, he stated, carefully watching my face. They think that you are the key to walking in the sunlight, living longer, being stronger. I am sure there's more, but that's the gist of it. But the light still affects me in either form. We know that, and we told the council that. They don't believe you? I'm sure most of them do, but the problem is that those outside don't believe it. I looked up at the window, now shuttered with special metal. So these people want to get a hold of my blood? When he didn't answer right away, I sighed. Oh, I see. They want me. Some do, he answered, and I wrinkled my nose. And telling them isn't going to convince them? Not at this point, he stated, and I heard the anger in his and worry in his words. Reina, I care about you a lot. I know you know that, but I needed to tell you that. It's going to be hard for you to trust people from this point, and you need to be very guarded about who you do trust. Why isn't my dad telling me this? He will. He wanted me to talk to you. Well, actually, I asked to talk to you first. Why? He reached over and lifted my chin. We're putting some things in place, in case things don't go so well. Some are the heightened security, other are plans in case we need to get you out of here. I frowned. I already know that drill. So do others, so they had to be changed. He paused for a moment. I don't even want you taking just what I say on this. It's too important. Your father will tell you more, but I just wanted to let you know that things have gotten a bit more serious than we thought. Is that why Track is so upset? He chuckled. For the most part. He's very worried about you. Part of him wants to get you out of here right now. Another part tells him this place is safer. He's torn by that. We all are. Track is angry that somebody got the vial out, and he wants to find him or her and deal with them. Another part of him wants you in Polson with the pack. I nodded, letting the information sink in. And then there is the part about my feelings for you. I glanced at the door. Where was one of those interruptions when you needed them? Track is very protective of you. I have to admit, I wonder still if he has more feelings for you than either of you admits. I looked up. Track is my best friend, I snapped. Jonathan nodded. I know that. I must admit I'm a little jealous of how close you two are. Jealous? Another nod. Yes. Seeing you two together makes it hard for me to, well, that's what I wanted to talk to him about. I thought it's because of what's going on around here. Part of it, yes. The other part, Reina, is that I really do care about you. I mean, I have feelings for you. Oh, please let the walls explode or something, my mind cried out. I stiffened, and he smiled. I'm usually unshakable, but I can't seem to get the words right for this. Okay, I would take a violent shifting right about now, even. Reina, I talked to your father. I talked to Track. And now I would like to ask you. I want to know if... He dropped my hand and stood. I can't believe this is so hard for me, he almost hissed, pacing in front of me. I sat back and watched him in awe. He ran a hand through his hair, looked at me, took a few more steps, and then turned. There are much more important things going on right now, he stated, although he seemed to be talking to himself. I couldn't respond anyhow, so I was glad when he continued to pace. This isn't really the best time for this. Again, he didn't seem to expect any response from me. Then suddenly he squared his shoulders, came back over, and sat down, looking at me hard. Reina, I haven't ever felt this way before. I'm sorry if I can't seem to find the right words. You need someone strong right now, and I'm stuttering like an idiot. Yeah, he was, but I couldn't help giving a small smile. I liked seeing him this way. Not all the time, but seeing his hard resolve falter was endearing somehow, if that was the right word. I watched his face as he struggled with the words. I knew what he wanted to ask me now. I wasn't that naive, but seeing the torment as he tried made me excited. Wow, was I sadistic? I guess I liked knowing it wasn't that easy for him, that I wasn't just another business deal to be made. His unease and fumbling showed that he was sincere, and I liked that. Unfortunately, I was also extremely nervous, so I couldn't offer him any help either. Either he would have to spit it out, or we would probably both just sit there. His eyes did ask me for help, but I only blinked at him. He nodded. I might be setting myself up for some serious disappointment, but I have to. I need to. He growled at himself, and my smile widened a bit more. My nervousness faded just a tiny bit, seeing him so stressed. He sat back on the couch, then chuckled. Some strong, in-charge vampire I turned out to be. Wow, did this actually make him seem cuter? This vulnerability was exciting to me. Werewolves mated for life. Vampires did the same, only we called it unioned. There was pre-mated and pre-union time in both, though. The dating phase. It had fancier terms, but those were only used by the older ones. He sat up fast, which made me jump a little. He apologized, and I nodded, still not able to think of what to say. He looked at me hard, and I shifted under his stare. Finally, he looked away. Maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe I shouldn't do this right now. He looked down at the floor. You have so much going on right now. What? My mind screamed out, although I was careful to keep it internal. Was he serious? I felt a bit of anger start to creep through me. He looked up at me then. Would you be my girlfriend? He spat out so fast that I had to replay the words. Okay, not the most unique term, but at least he finally got it out. He leaned forward, his arms on his thighs. Did that sound as stupid as I think it did? He moaned. I chuckled then. Maybe, just a little. He only nodded. When I didn't respond, he stood. I'm sorry. Truly and deeply sorry. I shouldn't have done this. I stood, for some reason my fear gone. Maybe it was seeing him so nervous and vulnerable. I don't know, but I smiled at him. Yes. He stiffened and then slowly looked up, scanning my face for signs of mockery. That stung a little, but then a smile spread across his face. His eyes sparkled as he stepped up to me. Did you just say yes? I chuckled. I think so. You think so? I shrugged. Well, I'm kinda new at this. He smiled at me, and then the panic and realization hit me, and I teetered just a little. 100 thoughts hit me all at once, and I wondered what I was doing. Jonathan didn't seem to notice, not at first. His gray eyes were sparkling, and he smiled. Then he did seem to notice. He took my hand and sat me back down. Good thing, too, because things were starting to spin just a little. Are you regretting your decision already? He asked seriously. I smiled. No, but I just... Great, now I was the one stuttering like a fool. I want us to be honest with each other, he stated quietly. I don't want you to spit out an answer if you aren't ready. Now I was blowing this. I shook my head. No, it's not that. I'm just wondering why. Why? I nodded. Why me? I'm a mess. My life is a mess. I'm not a full vampire. Ah, he sighed, as that seemed to somehow make him feel better. He turned to face me, sitting sideways. Reina, I have seen you before. When my brows rose, he shrugged. I've come to the manor a dozen times at least, for business with your father. I tried to recall seeing him before, but my dad had so many people in and out, I never paid much attention. I think your dad meant for us to bump into each other, he smiled. I did see you, walking down a hall or going into a room. I never got to meet you, but I knew then. Oh, was he going to ruin this with I knew you were the one speech? That I wanted to meet you, he said. Your dad talked about you so much I felt like I knew you. He chewed his lower lip and I smiled a bit. When he saw me watching you one day, he took me into his study and had a serious talk with me. Really? He nodded, chuckling. It wasn't the nicest talk at first. My brows rose higher in surprise, but he continued. He told me I was one of many boys, yes, he used that term, that showed interest in you, and then he proceeded to caution me against it. Against it? But I thought... He shook his head. I think he was testing me. I believe that his tactics succeeded in scaring off many before, and probably after me. I'll admit, it did scare me at first. Then I realized that he was being a protective father and was weeding out the ones that were only after your title. I frowned and glanced at the door. I think I needed to have a talk with my dad. But I went back and talked to him. I explained that I had plenty of money, a good start on a name for myself, and that I wasn't looking for a quick way to climb any ladders. He smiled then. You flat out threatened me then, but I didn't back down. So, I was a challenge? I didn't like where this was going. No, and yes, he admitted. It wasn't easy getting your father to see me as more than a guy after his daughter. So in that, yes, it was a challenge, but I wanted him to see me, and to see me as someone that was possibly worthy of his daughter. I sat back, leaning against the arm so I was facing him as well. I wanted to cross my arms over my chest hard, but I kept them in my lap. This isn't coming out right, he chuckled. I wanted your father to see me as me. I gave a small nod, and he continued. I'm usually very good with words and explaining things, but I seem to be making myself look worse somehow. I shrugged, and he nodded. I deserve that, but I hope you understand just how many guys had found the ball were brave enough to approach your father about you. Just how many? I asked, my curiosity piqued now. Maybe I shouldn't tell you. You might want to review the list to see if there is someone there you might like. I chewed my lip, but the small smile showed anyhow. When he finally softened up a bit and the threats ebbed a little, he started to get to know me. He made a few surprise visits to my businesses, too, always knowing when I would be on site. Really? I asked, my voice up an octave. Yes, he was checking to see what I did when I didn't think anyone was looking. Wow, score one for Dad, I smiled. I seemed to have passed because he started inviting me to join him at off-site meetings. How long? I asked in awe. About a year. I gasped. A year? He nodded. Yep, a full year before he finally invited me here. for us to meet. Okay, have I mentioned how much I love my dad? What dad would do something like that? He also had all my businesses checked, my banking records, and he talked with people around me. Okay, maybe that was a little much. Why did you put up with that? He smiled. Because I knew why he was doing it, for one, and also because I had nothing to hide. I was having mixed feelings here. He and my dad having a year-long get-to-know-each-other period, and I had no clue? But why would you still want with all my issues now? Reina, for the last year I've been proving myself to your father. I've been trying to show him that I am worthy of a daughter that he loves so much that he makes getting close to you that hard. You have only known me a very short time, but I have been in your life, so to speak, for much longer. My brows knitted as his words sunk in. I know that may sound odd, he stated, but I never regretted it. I was never angry by the inquiries. I understood and respected his reasons. But the most important part was, through all of this, I really did want to meet you and get the chance to show you the real me. Did you talk to Track about this? He nodded. I can't pretend to completely understand the relationship between you two or between you and your pack. I knew, it was common knowledge, that you had wolf bloodline and that you were an active part in your pack. I tried to learn more about that. I wanted to make sure it was something I could handle, and I wanted to understand it. I wanted to get mad at that, but I couldn't. I was glad he did it, to be honest. It wasn't something that was easy for a non-werewolf to understand. He leaned one arm on the back of the couch. Track threatened more body parts than I knew I even had. He smiled and I grinned. He had the same worries as your father about me wanting what your title offers. I looked towards the door again. Is that why he's so angry? He shrugged. In part. I told him I was going to ask you. The rest is the worry about what's going on. He told me I should wait. So, why did you ask me instead of waiting, that is? Because I couldn't hold it in any longer, Reina. He looked at me hard. I have been fighting with this for a long time. Holding back because I knew you didn't know me. Because of all the things you were going through. I guess it was partially selfish, but I couldn't wait any longer to tell you how I feel about you. Wow. Was about all I could think about at that moment. I watched him, harder than I meant to. He moved his arms down. I know you said yes before you knew all of this. I went to speak, but he shook his head. I still hope you'll give me the chance to show you that I really do care. I closed my mouth. He leaned forward. I hope what I told you hasn't changed your mind, but I wanted you to know. It was important that you knew all the facts. Then why did you let me answer? He smiled. I didn't expect you to answer so quickly. Yeah, I would have been several shades of red now if I could blush. I expected to have to do a lot of convincing. Great. Now I felt like an idiot for spitting it out. Don't get me wrong. I am more than thrilled, he smiled. I want to show you that you didn't make the wrong choice. But I also understand that you need time to process all of this. And under the circumstances, well, I'm willing to wait as long as you need me to. Wait, didn't I already say yes? He nodded. Before we make any announcements. And I'm going to stop there.